What if Issei become god of all vampires after defeating Great Red? The dimensional gap was not a place. This was the first thing Issei had understood when he'd entered it, and it remained the truest thing about it. The gap between dimensions was not a location in any sense that the word normally implied. It had no floor, no ceiling, no walls. It had no light source and yet was not entirely dark. It was the space between the pages of a book, real in the sense that it existed, but not in any sense that a living thing was meant to navigate. And yet here he was, Issei Hayato, 17 years old, third-year student at Ko Academy, low-class devil of the Gremry peerage, wielder of the boosted gear. Here he was, floating in the space between realities, and somewhere in the churning non-distance ahead of him, the true dragon was waiting. Great Red, the dragon of dragons. The Apocalypse Dragon. The entity that existed in the dimensional gap the way a sun exists in space, not because it had chosen to be there, but because it was so enormous that there had organized itself around its presence. Issei had seen him before, at a distance, in circumstances that had not involved direct confrontation. He'd understood, at those distances, that Great Red was large. He had not understood what large meant until now. Great Red filled the gap the way storms fill sky, not edge to edge, but with the sense that edges were an irrelevance it hadn't bothered to acknowledge. His scales were crimson, the red of arterial blood and deep fire, and they moved with the slow certainty of tectonic plates. His eyes, when they found Issei in the churning nowhere of the gap, were gold-white and very calm, the way things that have never needed to be afraid are calm. "You are small," Great Red said, and the communication was not sound but something older than sound, something that happened directly in the understanding rather than through any physical medium. "Yeah," Issei said. "I get that a lot. And yet you are here." "I'm here," Issei agreed. "Why?" It wasn't a question exactly. It was something more like a category request. Great Red asking him to explain what kind of thing this was, this small creature presenting itself in the dimensional gap. Issei thought about how to answer that. He thought about Rias, who had died twice in the timeline that had led here, not truly, not permanently, but close enough that the memory of it lived in him like scar tissue. He thought about Aquino and Asia and Zenobia and Kaneko and Irina, his people, his peerage, the ones he'd made promises to. He thought about the Heavenly Dragon's conflict, the machinations of factions that had been using human and devil and fallen angel alike as pieces in games that predated most recorded history. He thought about the fact that Great Red's power, unanchored and wild in the dimensional gap, had been the source of instabilities that had been killing people for the past 8 months. Not intentionally. Great Red didn't do things intentionally in the way smaller beings did. But the gap's instabilities were his, and the consequences were real, and someone had to be here. Because nobody else could, Issei said. Great Red regarded him. "You intend to fight me?" "I intend to talk to you," Issei said. Fighting as if that doesn't work. A silence that was not silence. The gap made sounds that weren't sounds, a constant non-noise that pressed against the edges of consciousness. "Talk," Great Red said, with something that might have been curiosity. "The gap's instabilities," Issei said. "They're yours. Something in you is unsettled. It's been unsettled for months, and every time it shifts, the boundaries between dimensions rupture. People die. Not many, not catastrophically, but consistently. And it's getting worse." He paused. "I want to know why. Because if I know why, maybe we don't have to fight." Great Red was quiet. "Then, no one has asked before. No one could get here before," Issei said. "I've been building up to it for a year." "I know," Great Red said. "I have been watching you build." That was new information. Issei filed it. "Then you know I can actually challenge you now. Not beat you, probably. But challenge you. And you know Drake is in here, and Drake and Albion are the only things that have ever made you move." A pause. "The instability," Great Red said, "is because something is missing. Something that should exist in the structure of this place, and does not. A piece. I have been looking for it for longer than your civilization has existed." Issei processed that. "What kind of piece?" "A sovereign," Great Red said. "The old order of things required one. A point in the living world where certain authorities converge. The last one ended 500 years ago, and nothing replaced them. The gap feels the absence. I feel the absence. A pause that was several geological ages compressed. I did not expect the solution to arrive in a school uniform. Issei looked down at himself. He was, in fact, wearing his school uniform. He'd been in the middle of lunch when the emergency call had come through. It's been a long day, he said. You will fight me anyway, Great Red said. I can see it in you. You decided before you came. I decided that if talking didn't work, I wasn't going home without trying, Issei said. There's a difference, is there? Yeah, Issei said. Because fighting you because I have no other option is different from fighting you because I want to win. I don't want to win. I want the problem solved. Great Red regarded him for a very long time. Then, with the slow inevitability of continents moving, then let us see what you are made of, small thing. And whether the gap agrees. The fight was not describable in conventional terms. This was not false modesty on Issei's part. It was a technical reality. The dimensional gap did not behave like a physical space, and combat within it did not follow rules that physical space combat followed. There was no ground to stand on. There was no sky. There was Great Red, vast and fundamental, and there was Issei, small and determined, and there was the boosted gear blazing between them like a star someone had put in a red gauntlet. Boost, boost, boost. Each doubling came faster than the last, the accumulated power compressing into something that strained the gear's physical frame, cracks of light appearing along its surface. Drake's power and his own and the 12 months of grinding preparation all funneling into a single point. Do not hold back, Drake said. His voice was different here, fuller, closer to what it must have sounded like when he'd been a body rather than a presence. This is what we built toward. I know, Issei said. Boost, 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 boost. Great Red moved. The movement displaced reality the way a ship displaces water, not intentionally destructive, but so large that destruction was an incidental byproduct. Issei moved through it, using the gap's non-physics, using the year of training that had been specifically designed for exactly this kind of non-space navigation, pushing himself along vectors that didn't have names because the mathematics for them hadn't been invented yet. He hit Great Red 17 times. Not hard enough to hurt. Nothing Issei could generate would truly hurt Great Red, and he'd known that going in. But hard enough to be felt. Hard enough to register. Each strike a statement. I am here. I am real. I am not leaving. Great Red struck back once. The once was enough to send Issei through approximately 4 dimensions simultaneously, and leave him hanging in the gap with his uniform in significantly worse condition than when he'd started, and his entire left side reporting a category of sensation that his brain had helpfully labeled later problem. He's not fighting seriously, Drake said. I know, Issei said, pushing back toward the vast crimson shape through the churning nothing. He's evaluating. I know. What are you going to do? Keep going, Issei said. Until he's done evaluating. He kept going. He lost track of time, which was not surprising because the dimensional gap did not contain time in any reliable sense. He boosted until the gear was so overloaded that the red light of it had gone white. He pushed his body past every limit he'd identified in training and past several he hadn't known were limits until he hit them. He reached the edge of what he was, the absolute outer boundary of Issei Haidu, amplified by every tool and technique and desperate creative workaround he'd accumulated over 2 years of being a devil, and then he pushed past that. And something happened. The something was not a sound. It was not an explosion. It was more like the moment when a lock opens, a feeling of sudden alignment, of something that had been held in tension releasing into its correct configuration. The boosted gear changed. Not broke, changed. The red gauntlet dissolved and reformed into something that went further up his arm, further across his shoulder, denser and more elaborately structured, and at its center the gem blazed not red but a deep, impossible crimson that was the color of Great Red scales. Oh, Drake said, with the voice of something very old encountering something completely unexpected. Oh, Great Red said, with exactly the same intonation. The power that moved through Issei in that moment was not his. Or not only his. It was the boosted gear's accumulated doubling, yes, and Drake's fundamental nature, yes, but underneath both of those, vast and old and structural, something that belonged to the gap itself, some authority that the space between dimensions had been waiting to assign for 500 years. It moved through him like a tide, and he hit Great Red one more time, not with combat power. with presence. The full, undiluted presence of whatever he'd just become, concentrated into a single point of contact between his fist and the surface of the true dragon's chest. Great Red stopped. The gap stopped. Everything stopped. And then, with the slow certainty of a sun setting, inevitable, enormous, final, Great Red lowered his head, not in defeat. That was the thing Issei understood in the moment it happened. This was not a defeated being bowing to a conqueror. This was an ancient authority recognizing something it had been looking for. The way a river bows to the ocean, not out of weakness, but out of the recognition that the ocean is what the river was always flowing toward. There you are, Great Red said, and poured something into him. Issei did not remember the journey back. He was told later that the gate had opened on the edge of the Gremery Estate's grounds, the dimensional gap depositing him with the same casual disregard for human convenience that characterized most of his major life events, and that he'd been found by Kaneko, who had been on perimeter watch, lying face up in the grass looking at the sky with an expression she described as like someone doing a very long math problem in their head. He remembered the sky. The specific blue of a late afternoon in the human world, a color that the dimensional gap absolutely did not have and which was, at that moment, the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. He remembered Rias's voice, close and sharp with worry. He remembered Asia's hands, warm and glowing, healing the left side that had been reporting later problem for an indeterminate period. And then he remembered the moment Rias pulled back from checking him over and looked at him, really looked, with the precise supernatural senses of a high-class devil, and her expression went from worried to something he'd never seen on her face before. Issei, she said. What did you do? It's a long story, he said. You feel, she stopped. You feel different. You feel like, she was searching for the word with a focused intensity, her blue-green eyes moving over him like she was reading something written on a surface just beneath his skin. You feel like something that doesn't have a category. That tracks, he said. Issei. Akino's voice, from somewhere to his left. He turned to look at her and found her expression. Akino, who had faced fallen angels and monsters and her own father without visible fear, was very careful and very controlled. The old bloodlines, she said. I can feel them. Through the magical field. There, responding to something. To him, Rias said. A pause. To me, Issei agreed. Yes, Drake said to him alone. To you? The authority the gap transferred, it is not combat power. Or not only. It is something older. The sovereignty of blood. The thing that sat at the top of the vampire hierarchy before the last holder died 5 centuries ago. A pause. Great Red was its custodian in the interim. He has given it to you. Issei lay in the grass of the Gremery estate and looked at the sky and thought about that. Dragon, he said. Issei? Rias said, thinking he was talking to her. Sorry, Drake, he said. I'm the what, king? Of vampires? Sovereign, Drake said, with precision. The distinction matters. A king rules through force or inheritance or political structure. A sovereign is recognized by the fundamental nature of what is being governed. Every vampire bloodline on Earth, at this moment, feels your existence as a presence above them in a hierarchy they didn't know had an empty seat. That's, Issei said, not something I was planning for. Very little of your life has been, Drake said. You seem to manage. Rias was looking at him with an expression that he was going to need to explain things to. So was Akino. So was Kaneko, who had materialized at his feet and was looking at him with her characteristic flat intensity, which was somehow even flatter than usual, which in Kaneko terms meant she was processing something significant. Asia, who had finished healing him and was now sitting next to him in the grass, reached over and took his hand. Whatever happened, she said, you're okay. You came back. Yeah, he said. I came back. He sat up, and the evening light of the human world was warm on his face, and somewhere on the edges of his new awareness, extended now, reaching further than it ever had, feeling things at distances he couldn't measure. He could feel them. Old things. Ancient things. Beings that had been alive for centuries, settled in their power and their territories and the structures of their long existence. Feeling him. Feeling the thing in him that Great Red had placed there, orienting toward it the way compasses orient toward north, not because they chose to, but because the nature of the instrument demanded it. This, Issei said to Drake, is going to be complicated. You have no idea, the dragon agreed. Rias called a meeting. She called it immediately, which was characteristic of her when faced with situations that required information before decisions, and she called it in the Occult Research Club's traditional space, the old school building's clubroom. Late evening. Everyone gathered around the couches and the low table with tea that Aquino had made and a tension in the room that was thick enough to be architectural. Issei explained. He explained the fight, the approach, the dimensional gap, Great Red's communication, the shift in the boosted gear, the transfer of what Drake had confirmed was the vampire sovereignty. He explained it methodically, hitting the main points, pausing when people had questions, which was often. Kiba asked about the technical nature of the power transfer, because Kiba always found the structural details, and Drake answered through Issei with the patient thoroughness of someone who had been inside significant historical events and had opinions about getting the details right. Kaneko asked if Issei was going to be different now. He said he didn't know yet. She looked at him for a long moment and then said, with characteristic Kaneko economy, "You don't smell different," which he took as a positive sign. Zenobia asked if this meant he outranked the vampire factions on the three-faction peace arrangement. He said he genuinely didn't know, and would probably need someone with more political knowledge than him to figure that out. Asia didn't ask anything. She sat close to him and her presence said everything she needed to say, which was the same thing it always said, "You came back. That's what matters." Aquino sat slightly apart from the group, and she was the one who finally said the thing that nobody else had said yet. "There's a name," she said. "In the old records. The ones the Himejima clan maintained before everything. A title, from the vampire historical texts." She paused. "They called it the Sanguine Throne, the sovereign position above all blood-drinking lineages. It hasn't been occupied since before the last Great War." She looked at Issei. "Every vampire alive has grown up in a world where that position was empty. Where the hierarchy stopped at the level of great lords and ancient houses. And now it doesn't," Rias said. "Now it doesn't," Aquino agreed. Silence. "How are they going to react?" Kiba asked. "In different ways," Rias said. She was in her analytical mode now, sitting straight, working through it with the political intelligence that was one of her most formidable qualities. Some will come immediately. Out of instinct, if the sovereignty is as fundamental as Drake describes. Some will resist. Some will test it. She looked at Issei. And some will come to evaluate, not to kneel and not to challenge. Just to see. Issei nodded slowly. He could feel, distantly, at the edge of the new awareness, the ones who were already moving, old things, waking from the particular settled stillness of beings who hadn't expected to be disturbed. One of them, he said, aware of a specific resonance among the distant presences, something that felt older and more self-contained than most, something that felt like a castle on a mountain. One of them is very far away and is not moving yet. Significant? Rias asked. I don't know, he said. Just distinctive. Interesting, Drake said. What? Issei said. That one, the dragon said. She is not orienting toward you the way the others are. The others feel the sovereignty and it pulls them, like gravity. She feels it and she is, thinking, deciding whether to move at all. A pause. She is the oldest one you can currently perceive. Issei turned that over. The oldest one. Something very old, and very self-contained, and thinking rather than reacting. She'll come eventually, he said. Or she won't, and I'll have to go to her. Do you know who she is? Rias asked. Not yet, he said. What he did know, in the way that the new awareness was already teaching him to know things, not with information but with resonance, was that whoever she was going to be interesting. He sat in the clubroom with his people around him, tea going cold on the table, the evening light shifting toward dark, and he thought about what it meant to be the sovereign of something he hadn't sought and couldn't put down. And very far away, in a castle on a mountain in Eastern Europe, a woman with amber eyes and centuries of composed authority sat at her enormous desk and felt something she hadn't felt in 500 years. A presence above her in the hierarchy of blood. She looked at it, not with submission, not with rebellion, but with the careful, deliberate attention of someone who had survived everything that had tried to end her by being very good at understanding what she was dealing with before she responded. A boy, she thought, from the shape of the presence. Young. newly come into this. She picked up her wine glass. We shall see, Alchina Dimitrescu thought, and drank, and did not move yet. The first ones arrived at dawn. 2 of them, older vampires, not ancient but not young, representatives of a Central European bloodline that Rias, checking her family's records at speed, identified as having been established in the 13th century. They appeared at the Gremry estate's boundary in the grey light before sunrise, which was information in itself. Vampires who chose to travel at dawn were making a statement about their confidence in their own capabilities. They stood at the gate, and they looked at Issei when he came to meet them, and the look in their eyes was the specific look of beings experiencing something their instincts were processing faster than their conscious minds. They knelt, not dramatically, not performatively. They knelt the way you do something that your body does before you've finished deciding to do it, a reflex of blood and ancient structure recognizing the thing above it. Issei looked at them kneeling in the grey dawn light, and felt several things simultaneously. He felt the sovereignty, the weight of it, the reality of it, the way it recognized them in return, these old lives bowing toward the thing Great Red had placed in him. He also felt deeply, profoundly, sincerely uncomfortable. Please stand up, he said. They looked up at him. I mean it, he said. Please. Stand up. It's 6 in the morning and you've traveled a long way and the grass is wet. Stand up. They stood, with expressions that suggested this was not how they'd expected this to go. You are going to have to get more comfortable with being knelt to, Drake observed. I am going to get comfortable with asking people not to kneel, Issei said, internally. We're going to meet in the middle somewhere. That is, Drake said, with something that might have been fondness filtered through several thousand years of draconic perspective, extremely you. By midday, there were 7. By evening, 12. They came from different directions and different lineages and with different expressions, some with the reflex recognition look of the first 2, some more guarded, some with the particular wariness of old beings who had learned to be careful about new things. All of them felt it when they came close enough. All of them oriented to it. Issei met each of them at the gate. He asked each of them to stand up. He introduced himself by name, and asked their names in return, which seemed to confuse most of them. He had Rias and Aquino nearby for the political details he was inevitably going to miss, and Kiba for security because Kiba was very good at being present in a way that was reassuring without being threatening. By the end of the second day, he had met 23 vampires of varying ages and lineages and had learned several things. 1. The sovereignty was real and recognized. There was no political ambiguity about it. Whatever Great Red had transferred, it was the genuine article, ancient and fundamental in a way that no amount of skepticism could rationalize away once you were standing close enough to feel it. 2. The vampire world had been running without this particular authority for 500 years, and it had developed its own structures and hierarchies in the absence, and those structures were not going to dissolve just because the sanguine throne had a new occupant. 3. The oldest ones hadn't come yet. The most significant bloodlines, the truly ancient ones, the ones whose lineages predated the 3-faction war, the ones whose authority in the vampire world was absolute and long established, were absent, watching, deciding, and one of them, very far away, was still just thinking. She moved today, Drake said, on the evening of the second day. Not toward you. She moved within her own territory. Walked her own grounds. A pause. She is deciding. What's she deciding? Issei asked. Whether you are worth coming to see, Drake said. Or whether she waits for you to come to her. Issei thought about a presence that felt like a castle on a mountain. Something self-contained and old and used to being the largest thing in its world. What would make her decide to come? He asked. I think, Drake said slowly, that she would come if she believed the sovereign was something genuinely new. Not a power that had changed hands, but a person. Something she hadn't encountered before. She's been around for centuries, Issei said. She thinks she's seen everything. Yes, Drake said, and I'd have to be something she hasn't seen. You are 17 years old. You became the sovereign of all vampire kind by accident, while wearing a school uniform, and your primary response to ancient beings kneeling before you has been to ask them to please stand up, Drake said. I suspect that, if she came to know these facts, she would find them sufficient. Issei looked out at the evening from the Gremry Estate's grounds, at the sky going dark over Japan, at the stars beginning to appear at the edges. Far away, very far away, across oceans and mountain ranges. He could feel her in the new awareness. Something vast and certain of itself, and underneath that certainty, something that had been alone in its authority for a very long time. Tell me about her, he said. I do not know the specifics, Drake said. But I know the shape of what she is. She has managed her own domain for centuries without yielding to anything. She has survived because she has never made the mistake of underestimating what she faced. A pause. She will not underestimate you. She is too old for that, but she will test whether you are worth taking seriously. Good, Issei said. Good? I'd rather be tested honestly than accepted because of a title, Issei said. Titles are just words. What I am is what I am. A silence. Then Drake said, with the weight of a being who had been inside several thousand years of history. You know, boy, of all the hosts I have carried, you are the first one who has ever made me curious about how things will turn out. Is that a compliment? It is an observation, Drake said. But yes. It is also a compliment. Issei smiled at the darkening sky, and the sovereignty sat in him like a stone in a river, not weighing him down, but anchoring him, giving the current something to move around. And in a castle on a mountain in Eastern Europe, Alchina Dimitrescu made her decision. She called for her carriage. The morning after was a Tuesday. Issei knew this because his phone, which had somehow survived the dimensional gap entirely intact, technology was strange that way, told him so when he checked it at 6:47 in the morning while lying in his bed in the Hyade residence, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the fact that he was apparently the sovereign of all vampire kind. Tuesday. He had a math test on Thursday that he had not studied for. These two facts existed simultaneously in his head, and the combination of them was so absurd that he lay there for a moment just letting the absurdity of it wash over him. Then he sat up, because lying in bed wasn't going to solve either problem, and looked at the boosted gear. It looked the same. Red gauntlet, green gem, the familiar weight of it on his left arm. But it felt different, denser somehow, more layered, like a word that has acquired new meanings without changing its spelling. When he focused on it the way he'd learned to focus on it over 2 years of training, the response was different too, not just the boosted gear's familiar pulse, but something underneath it, something older, something that resonated with the new awareness he'd woken up with. Dragon, he said. Good morning, Drake said, with an attentiveness that was slightly more present than his usual pre-noon engagement. You slept. I did, Issei said. I didn't expect to. Your body needed it. The transfer was significant, physically. You were running on reserves by the end. A pause. How do you feel? Issei did an inventory. His left side, which Asia had healed thoroughly, was fine. His overall energy was lower than baseline but recovering. The awareness, the new one, the one that reached out across distances and felt old things in the world, was there, present and quiet, like a new sense that hadn't learned to filter itself yet. Different, he said. Not bad different. Just more. That is accurate, Drake said. The sovereignty is not a power in the combat sense. It doesn't add to what you can do in a fight. It is a relational thing. It defines what you are in relation to a specific category of beings. Vampires, Issei said. All of them, Drake confirmed. Every bloodline. Every lineage. Every individual who carries the nature of blood drinking in their fundamental structure. A pause. There are more of them than you probably realize. Issei thought about that. He'd known, in the abstract, that vampires existed. The supernatural world had many factions, and the vampire houses were one of them, maintaining their own territories and structures that overlapped with the devil faction's political arrangements in complicated ways. He hadn't known the numbers. Hadn't needed to. How many? He asked. Worldwide? Tens of thousands, Drake said. Most of them are not politically significant. Most of them live quietly, manage their territories, have nothing to do with the great houses or the old conflicts. A pause. But they all feel you now. The ones who are old enough to have the instinct fully developed felt you the moment Great Red made the transfer. The younger ones will take longer, days, weeks, as the sovereignty propagates through the network of bloodlines. Network, Issei repeated. Vampires are connected, Drake said. Not in the way humans are connected socially. More fundamental. The ones made from old blood carry something of that blood's nature. A lineage is like a river. The ancient bloodline is the source, and every vampire made from it carries the current downstream. He paused. The sovereignty speaks to the source. And from the source, eventually, to the current. Issei sat with that for a moment. Then he got up, because he was going to need breakfast to deal with any of this, and thinking about cosmic vampire hierarchies on an empty stomach was not something he wanted to attempt. His mother had made rice and miso soup. She was at the kitchen counter when he came downstairs, still in her house clothes, and she turned when he came in and smiled the specific smile she had for mornings, warm and slightly distracted. The smile of someone whose love for the people in their household is so baseline and constant that it expresses itself as default setting rather than active decision. You were home late, she said. Club stuff, Issei said, which was technically accurate in the way that most of his explanations to his parents were technically accurate. You look tired, she said, studying him with the precision that parents develop from years of looking at a specific face and learning all its tells. I'm okay, he said. She looked at him for another moment, in the way she did sometimes, as if she was aware that there were dimensions to his life she didn't have access to and had made a complicated peace with that fact. Then she turned back to the counter and said, Eat before it gets cold. He ate. The normalcy of it, rice, soup, the sound of morning in the house, his father's newspaper on the table though his father had already left for work, was something he held on to deliberately, not because he was afraid it would disappear, but because it was real, and real things needed to be noticed. You are being very calm, Drake observed. Panicking won't help, Issei said, internally. Most 17-year-olds who became the sovereign of all vampire kind overnight would not respond to that fact by eating miso soup and thinking about their math test. I'm a specialist, Issei said. Rias called at 8:30. The Citri, she said, without preamble, when he picked up. Sona knows. I don't know how. Probably the same way she knows everything, which is that she is terrifyingly well informed. But she called me 20 minutes ago and she wants a meeting. When? Issei said. Today, Rias said. This afternoon? She's coming to the estate. A pause. She's bringing her queen. Issei thought about Sona Citri. Precise, brilliant, political, the kind of intelligence that processed information the way a very well-maintained machine processes material, thoroughly, and without waste. Sona knowing was not surprising. Sona wanting a meeting immediately was, if anything, restrained. I'll be there, he said. Also, Rias said, and her voice shifted slightly, the shift she did when she was about to say something that was important, and that she'd been deciding how to say. There are more of them at the gate this morning. Vampires. 7 more since last night. I know, he said. He'd felt them arrive. The awareness had woken him briefly at 3 in the morning, registering new presences orienting toward his location. A pause. You felt them, she said. The awareness is still calibrating, he said. It wakes me up when something significant comes close. I'll probably get better at filtering it. Another pause longer. Issei, she said. Rias, he said. How are you, actually? Not tactically. How are you? He thought about how to answer that honestly. I'm okay, he said. I'm going to need time to figure out what all of this means. But I'm okay. He paused. I came back. Everything else is just the next problem. He could hear her exhale. Yes, she said. It is. Another pause, and when she spoke again her voice had the particular quality it got when she was being sincere without her usual careful management of how sincerity was expressed. I'm glad you came back. Me too, he said. The meeting with Sona was in the Gremery Estate's formal sitting room, which was a space Issei had always found slightly overwhelming. Too much furniture of too high a quality, arranged with the precise intentionality of someone who had grown up understanding that rooms communicated status. Sona arrived exactly on time, which was the only way Sona did anything. She was in her student council president mode, gray suit, glasses, posture that was a form of argument. Her queen, Tsubaki Shinra, was half a step behind her with a composure that mirrored and complemented her master's. They sat across from Issei and Rias and Aquino at the sitting room's central arrangement, and Sona looked at Issei with the specific look she had for problems she was in the process of solving. Tell me what happened, she said. He told her. The same account he'd given to his peerage the night before, but Sona's version, denser with technical detail, because she would want it, and would use it. She listened without interrupting, which was how she always listened, the information going in and being organized in real time. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. The political implications, she said, are significant. I figured, Issei said. The vampire factions have been loosely incorporated into the three-faction arrangement, she said. Not directly, but adjacently. They have representation. They have territories that overlap with devil domains in various ways. They have disputes that the existing structure mediates. A pause. The Sanguine Throne's existence would place a sovereign authority above all of those structures. Above the individual houses. Above the great lords. She looked at him steadily. Above, technically, the arrangement that currently governs most of those interactions. I'm not trying to upset the arrangement, Issei said. I know you're not, she said. But the arrangement doesn't care about your intentions. It responds to structural realities. And the structural reality is that you now occupy a position that has no existing place in the current political architecture, and you are sitting on top of a faction that is already incorporated into that architecture in a complicated way. She folded her hands on her knee. There will need to be negotiations. At a significant level, probably involving the Maos, Sirzex Rias said, and Serafal, Sona said, with the slight tightening around her eyes that she always had when discussing her sister's involvement in serious politics. Serafal has always maintained closer ties to the vampire great houses than the other Maos. She will have opinions. When doesn't she? Aquino murmured. The important thing, Sona continued, looking at Issei, is that you not make any commitments or statements before the political framework is understood. The vampires coming to you now, the ones at the gate, they're responding to instinct. That instinct will drive them, but it will also be followed, eventually, by expectation. They will expect a sovereign to govern, to make decisions, to represent their interests. She paused. You need to understand what those interests are before you can do any of that responsibly. Issei nodded. I know, he said. I'm not planning to start issuing edicts. Good, she said. Because an edict from a position like yours, issued without full political context, could trigger responses across multiple factions that would take years to untangle. She looked at him over her glasses with the expression that meant she was being direct in a way she'd calculated was necessary. I want to help with this, Issei, not because of the political implications for the Citri, though those exist. Because you are someone I consider, she paused, choosing the word, important. And important people walking into complex situations without adequate support is a waste. Issei looked at her. Sona Citri did not make personal statements easily. This was as close to I care about what happens to you as her particular architecture of expression was likely to get. Thank you, he said. She nodded once, with the brisk efficiency of someone accepting acknowledgement and moving on. Now. The ones who haven't come yet. The old houses. What do you know about them? They were at it for 3 hours. Sona had, of course, brought documentation. Because of course she had. Because this was Sona, and Sona approached all significant events as if they might require a briefing document. The vampire great houses, their histories, their territories, their relationships with the devil factions, their internal politics. She walked through them with the systematic thoroughness that was her primary mode, and Issei listened and asked questions and built his picture. Most of the great houses he'd never heard of. Some of them he recognized from passing references in devil political discussions. 1 or 2 had names that appeared in the historical records Rias had shared with him during his earlier education in supernatural politics. And then Sona said a name that rang differently in the new awareness. The Dimitrescu line, she said. One of the oldest surviving bloodlines in Eastern Europe. The head of the house, Alchina Dimitrescu, has maintained her domain in the Carpathian region for, the records are unclear, but conservatively 4 centuries. Possibly longer. She looked at a specific page. She has never, in documented history, submitted to any external authority. Not the great lords, not the old councils, not the 3-faction arrangements adjacent structures. A pause. She is, by most accounts, the most significant individual vampire currently alive. The awareness rang like a struck bell. That one, Drake said, and his voice had something in it that Issei hadn't heard before. something close to respect. She hasn't come, Rias said, looking at Issei. No, he said. Will she? He felt for the distant presence, the one that felt like a castle on a mountain, that had been thinking since the first moment of the sovereignty's transfer, that moved within its own territory with the certainty of something that had never needed to move for anything else. She's decided, he said, and the awareness told him this was true. She's coming. Sona looked at him sharply. You can feel that? Not precisely, he said. More like a direction. A change in what she's doing. He paused. She was thinking. Now she's moving. A silence in the room. Alchina Dimitrescu, Sona said carefully, has not left her territory in, the records suggest, decades. Possibly longer. She looked at Issei with an expression that was simultaneously analytical and something more personal. She is coming because of you. Because of the sovereignty, Issei said. No, Sona said. If it were only the sovereignty, she'd have been one of the first. She's the most significant. The pull would be strongest for her. She paused, working through it. She held. She thought. She decided. That means she isn't coming because she felt compelled. She's coming because she chose to. She met his eyes. That is a meaningful distinction. Issei thought about what Drake had said. She would come if she believed the sovereign was something genuinely new. Yeah, he said. I think it is. She arrived on a Friday. Not to the Gremry estate. She sent word ahead, through a channel that Rias's staff identified as one of the old vampire communication networks, a system of messengers and supernatural posts that predated every modern communication technology, and was considerably more reliable in certain contexts. The message was brief and carried an implicit expectation so deeply embedded in its phrasing that it was nearly invisible. I will be in the city on Friday. I would find it convenient to meet the new sovereign at a neutral location of his choosing. A.D. Issei read it twice and then showed it to Rias. She's not coming to you, Rias said. No, Issei agreed. She's not asking you to come to her either, Rias said. She's offering neutral ground. A pause. That's a negotiating posture. She's signaling that she recognizes the sovereignty but is not subordinating herself. She is coming as an equal. Good, Issei said. Rias looked at him. Good? I don't want subordinates, Issei said. I want, he searched for the right word, people who take it seriously. There's a difference. He chose a tea house. Not the most politically obvious choice. Sona had suggested a formal meeting room in a neutral devil-affiliated building, and Rias had suggested the estate's own formal space but configured to suggest equality rather than hierarchy. He understood the reasoning behind both and chose the tea house anyway, because sometimes the choice of location was itself the statement. He got there 20 minutes early and sat at the table near the window and ordered tea and waited. She arrived exactly on time. He felt her coming before she came through the door, the awareness registering her presence with a clarity that was different from the other vampires he'd felt over the past week. They registered as presences. She registered as something more specific. Something that had a particular character, a particular weight. Like a piece of music that has an identifiable composer even before you know who wrote it. The door opened. Alchina Dimitrescu was not what he'd expected. Or rather, she was beyond what he'd expected in the specific way that the most significant things always exceeded their descriptions. He'd read Sona's documentation. He'd formed a picture. The picture had not accounted for the reality of her, the sheer physical presence. The height that even indoors and in modern clothes commanded a space differently than normal people did, the amber eyes that found him immediately, and did not look away. She was wearing modern clothes, or a version of modern that suggested someone who had adopted the contemporary aesthetic while maintaining a relationship with historical formality that was visible in the cut and quality of what she wore. Dark, structured, elegant. No gold pins in her hair here, but her hair was arranged with the same precision, and she wore rings on both hands, and she moved through the tea house to his table with the specific quality of motion that centuries of absolute authority in your own space produces. She sat across from him. She looked at him. He looked at her. For a moment, the new awareness and whatever it was she carried on her end of this strange new relationship recognized each other, and the recognition was not words but something older than words, something that happened in the space between them like a current completing a circuit. You are younger than I expected, she said. Her voice was, he hadn't expected the voice. low and layered and warm in the way that things which have been very cold for a long time are sometimes warm, as if warmth is something they've had to cultivate deliberately. I get that a lot, Issei said. Something moved in her eyes. Do you? Usually from people who are about to decide I'm not worth taking seriously, he said. I've noticed it's often followed by updating that opinion. A pause. The corner of her mouth moved. Not much. Just enough. Alchina Dimitrescu, she said, which was not an introduction but a confirmation. He knew who she was. Issei Hayadu, he said. You already know that too. I do, she said. I have been informed. Since the moment the sovereignty transferred. She settled back slightly, with the ease of someone utterly comfortable in any space they occupy. I will be direct with you. I came because I was curious. Not because I felt compelled. I know, he said. You held longer than anyone else. You thought about it. She looked at him. You felt that. The awareness is still learning to be precise, he said. But your shape in it was distinctive from the beginning. You weren't moving toward me the way the others were. You were thinking, and you find that, she paused, notable. I find it interesting, he said. Everyone else came because something in their nature told them to. You came because you decided to. That's different. It tells me something about who you are. The amber eyes were doing something, layered and complicated, the processing of someone encountering something that doesn't quite fit the existing categories. What does it tell you? She asked. That you're not going to do anything just because something in you says to, he said. That you make your own decisions. That the sovereignty being real doesn't mean you automatically accept what it means. He met her eyes. And that you came anyway. Which means you decided there was something worth seeing. A silence. You are, she said slowly, not what I expected. What did you expect? Something that wore the title, she said. Something that had power and knew it, and expected the world to organize around that knowledge. She studied him across the table. You ordered tea. You chose a tea house. You are sitting in a school uniform. Her gaze moved briefly, precisely over the co-academy uniform he was wearing because he'd come straight from school. And you are speaking to me as if I am a person whose opinion interests you rather than a subject whose submission you are owed. You're not my subject, Issei said. You're a person I wanted to meet. The amber eyes stilled. The sovereignty, she began, is real, he said. I'm not pretending it isn't. Something real happened, and it changed the structure of things, and that matters. But that doesn't mean I want you to kneel. I've been asking everyone who tries to kneel to please stand up, and it's not false modesty. He paused. I don't want to be the kind of sovereign that needs people kneeling to feel real. Alchina Dimitrescu looked at him across the tea-house table for a long moment. The tea-house was quiet around them, a human space, ordinary Friday afternoon, other people at other tables talking about ordinary things. Issei was used to having significant conversations in completely incongruous settings. It came with the life. You are going to be very complicated, she said finally. I've been told that too, he said. By whom? Mostly by powerful women who were trying to figure out what to do with me, he said. And this time the corner of her mouth didn't just move. It became, briefly, entirely unmistakably, a real smile. Not large. Not unguarded. But real. The kind that exists before the composure reasserts itself. The kind that tells you something true about the person behind the centuries of careful authority. The tea arrived. Issei poured for both of them. An automatic gesture, something his mother had taught him, and slid her cup across the table, and she looked at the cup and then at him with an expression that was doing several things at once. Tell me, she said, picking up the cup with a hand that bore rings on every finger, about the dragon. And Issei, who had been telling people about Drake for 2 years and had gotten fairly good at it, told her. And Alchina Dimitrescu, who had been listening to people talk for centuries and had learned to tell immediately whether what she was hearing was worth listening to, listened. Outside, the ordinary Friday continued around them, and inside 2 people who were both, in their very different ways, carrying things that most of the world couldn't see, found that the table between them was not, after all, so wide. Interesting, Drake said quietly, in the back of Issei's mind. Yes, Issei agreed. She is not what you expected either. No, he said. She isn't. He watched her listen, the quality of her attention, the precision of it. The way her amber eyes moved when something he said caught at something she was thinking, and he thought about the castle on a mountain that he'd felt her moving through, and the centuries of authority, and the decision she'd made to come anyway. And he thought, one thing at a time. But he also thought, this one is worth taking slowly. The seventh vampire to arrive brought gifts. Issei discovered this when Rias's head maid, a devil of considerable composure who had managed the Gremery estate through several decades of supernatural political traffic, appeared at the door of the study, where he was reviewing Sona's documentation, and said, with the specific neutrality of someone delivering information they found personally unusual, "The gentleman at the gate has brought 3 cases of what he describes as a replaceable vintage wine, a sealed letter of introduction from the Carpathian Council, and what appears to be a very old sword." Issei looked up from the documents. "A sword?" "Yes, my lord." "Please don't call me that," Issei said, which he'd been saying to the estate staff since day 2 and which was having approximately 0 effect. "Yes, my lord," she said. He went to the gate. The vampire waiting there was old, not in the way that showed physically, because old vampires rarely showed their age on the surface, but in the way that showed in how he occupied space, the particular settled quality of someone who had been exactly what they were for a very long time and had stopped performing it. He was formally dressed, silver-haired, and when Issei came through the gate he did what they all did, oriented, recognized, and began to lower himself. "Please don't," Issei said before the knees hit the ground. The vampire stopped, halfway down, with the expression of someone whose body had received a countermanding instruction from an unexpected source. He straightened slowly, with the careful dignity of someone recovering a position without acknowledging they'd lost it. "Sovereign," he said. Issei said. "What's your name?" A pause, not long but specific. The pause of someone recalibrating. "Valdemir," the vampire said. "Of the Aldrich bloodline. We have held territory in the northern reaches of the Baltic region since a long time ago," Issei said. "I've been reading the documentation. The Aldrich line, you were one of the founding members of the old Vampire Council, before the council dissolved." Valdemir looked at him. Something shifted in the old eyes, not surprise exactly, but the recognition of being known, which was different from and rarer than being recognized. "You know the history." "I've been studying," Issei said. "I figured I should understand what I'm dealing with before I start making any decisions." He looked at the cases beside Valdemir, the sealed letter, the sword in its scabbard. "You brought things." "Gifts," Valdemir said. "It is traditional when—" "You don't have to bring gifts," Issei said. "I appreciate the gesture, but I'm not." He searched for the right framing. "I'm not collecting tribute." "You came a long way." "That's enough." Valdemir looked at him for a long moment with those old, settled eyes. "The wine is from my estate cellars," he said. "It is 300 years old. I brought it because I thought it might be difficult to find good wine in Japan, and because," he paused, "because I wanted to bring something that represented real effort. Not political currency. Just," another pause, searching for it, "respect." Issei looked at him. "In that case," he said, "thank you. Please come in." By the end of the week, there were 23 vampires resident in or near the Gremery estate, which was creating a logistical situation that Rias was managing with the specific controlled intensity she brought to all logistical challenges, which was to say, extremely competently while radiating the energy of someone who had not entirely expected this particular challenge. "We need a formal structure," she said, at the morning meeting that had become a daily event. The core group, Rias, Aquino, Sona via video call, and Issei, with Kiba present for security assessments. The vampires who are here are not all staying. Most of them came to confirm. To feel the sovereignty in person and then return to their territories. But some of them want to remain. To be present, and that requires a court, Sona said from the screen. "You're describing the beginning of a court." "I'm not having a court," Issei said. "You may not have a choice," Sona said, with the patience of someone who had explained structural political necessities many times and had learned to do it without condescension, mostly. "A sovereign without a court is a title without infrastructure. The vampire houses will need a point of contact. A way to bring disputes, requests, concerns. If you don't create that structure deliberately, it will create itself, and the version that creates itself will reflect the interests of whoever is positioned to shape it rather than your own intentions." Issei looked at her. You've thought about this. I've been thinking about very little else for 5 days, Sona said. What would a court actually look like? He asked. Practically. What would I need to do? At minimum, she said, a formal schedule of availability. A designated space, not necessarily permanent, not necessarily large, but consistent. A method for receiving petitions or communications from the houses. And she paused, an inner council. People whose judgment you trust and who can help you understand what you're receiving before you respond to it. I have people, Issei said. You have your peerage, Sona said. Which is excellent, and which I am not suggesting you replace. But your peerage is a devil structure. A vampire court's inner council would ideally include vampires. People of the old blood who can translate the culture and the history and the politics in ways that, she stopped. In ways that you can't, Issei finished, not accusatorially. Just accurately. Yes, she said. He thought about Valdemir, who had been at breakfast that morning with the careful formality of someone trying to find the right register for a situation that had no precedent, and who had ended up talking to Issei's mother about wine for 45 minutes because she'd asked about the bottles and he'd found the question impossible to answer briefly. He thought about the others, the ones who had stayed, who were navigating the Gremory estate with the wide-eyed adjustment of beings who had spent centuries in their own territories and were now in a completely foreign context. I'll talk to them, Issei said. The ones who are here. Find out who wants to be involved in something like that, and who just came to confirm and go home. He paused. But I want it to be a choice, not an appointment. If someone is on an inner council, it's because they chose to be there, not because the sovereignty put them there. Sona looked at him through the screen. That is, she said carefully, not how vampire political structures have traditionally operated. I know, Issei said. I read the documentation. And you want to do it differently. I want to do it in a way I can actually stand behind, he said. The traditional structure had 500 years to prove it could hold the sovereignty together. It didn't. Maybe it's worth trying something else. A silence on the call. Then Sona said, with the precise quietness she used when something had caught her off guard in a direction she hadn't been tracking, you have thought about this. I've been thinking about very little else for 5 days, he said, using her own phrasing back at her. Something that was almost a smile crossed Sona's face. The Dimitrescu meeting was yesterday, she said. How did it go? Well, Issei said. Define well. She came, he said. She sat across from me and she talked to me like a person, and she asked about Drake, and she didn't kneel. He paused. She's coming back on Monday. The silence this time was different. She's coming back, Rias said. Yes. Alchina Dimitrescu, Rias said with emphasis, who has not left her territory in decades, who came here specifically to meet you, who stayed for, how long was the meeting? 2.5 hours, Issei said. 2.5 hours, Rias repeated. Is coming back on Monday. Yes, Issei said. She wants to continue the conversation. Alchina, who had been quiet through most of the meeting, said, with perfect composure, what conversation? About governance, Issei said. About what it means to hold authority over something. She's been doing it for centuries. She had observations. About the things I'm going to encounter, the things the old structure got wrong. He paused. She's been thinking about it for a long time. Longer than anyone else who's been through that gate. A specific silence. Issei, Alchina said. Alchina, he said. She is, Alchina said, with the particular careful precision of someone choosing words with awareness of their weight, one of the most powerful vampires alive. She is also, a pause, extraordinary by all accounts. And she is coming back on Monday. Yes, Issei said. To continue a conversation. Yes. About governance. Alchina, Issei said. I'm just establishing the facts, she said, with a serenity that was doing a lot of work. Monday arrived. Issei was at the tea house again. 20 minutes early again, tea ordered again. He was aware that this was becoming a pattern and that patterns communicated things, and he was also aware that he didn't particularly want to change it. She arrived exactly on time again. The same quality of entrance. The awareness ringing when she was still a block away, the door opening, the specific way she occupied the space of the tea house. She was wearing something different today, still dark, still structured, with a brooch at her collar that was gold and elaborate and old, the kind of peace that had a history rather than a price. She sat. He poured tea. She looked at the cup with the same expression she'd had the first time, the one that suggested this small domestic gesture was something she was still deciding what to do with. "You've been busy," she said. 23 vampires at the gate so far, he said. "We're working on a framework for what comes next. Politically, I heard," she said. "The houses talk." She settled back. "The Eldrick line representative, Valdemir, spoke well of you. He talked to my mother about wine for almost an hour," Issei said. Something moved in her eyes. "Your mother, she lives here," he said. "The estate is where I'm based for now, but it's also where my family is." She saw the bottles and asked about them. He paused. "She asks about everything. It's a family trait." Alchina looked at him steadily. "Your mother knows what you are." "What has happened?" "She knows I'm a devil," he said. "She's known for a while. She doesn't know the full scope of the sovereignty situation yet. I haven't figured out how to explain it." He paused. "She did ask why there were so many formally dressed Europeans in the garden." The amber eyes did something that was almost warm. "What did you tell her?" "Club activity," Issei said, and Alchina Dimitrescu laughed. Not a small sound, a real one, the kind that came from somewhere genuine, surprised out of the layers of composed authority. It transformed her face the way laughter transforms faces, briefly, completely, showing the person underneath the centuries. Then she composed herself, with the practiced ease of long habit, and looked at him with those amber eyes and something in them that hadn't been there at the first meeting. "You are," she said, "entirely ridiculous." "Frequently," he agreed. She picked up the tea, held it for a moment. "The framework you're building," she said, returning to the substantive. "Sona Citri's involvement. I know her family's reputation. She is precise, and she is political, and her instincts are sound. But she is not of the blood." A pause. "There are things she will not be able to anticipate. That's why I wanted to talk to you," Issei said. She looked at him. "You've been running a domain for centuries," he said. "You've dealt with every version of the political problems I'm going to face. You've navigated the old council, the factional conflicts, the great lords who thought they had authority over you." He met her eyes. "What did you get wrong early on? What do you wish someone had told you?" The amber eyes went very still. "No one," she said after a moment, "has ever asked me that." What I just asked? What I got wrong," she said. "Everyone who has ever approached me for guidance has asked what I got right. How I built what I built. How I maintained it." A pause. "No one asked about the failures." "The failures are more useful," Issei said. "Anyone can learn from successes. The failures are where the actual lessons are." She looked at him across the tea table in the quiet of the ordinary Monday afternoon, and whatever was happening in her expression was complicated and layered and not entirely readable. But underneath all of it was something that was very simply attention. The full, complete, undivided attention of someone who had not been fully engaged in a very long time. "I was too absolute early on," she said finally. "I confused consistency with inflexibility. I believed that showing any variance in my decisions would be read as weakness." She paused. "It was read, instead, as someone who had not yet understood that strength includes the capacity to revise." Issei nodded. "What else?" "I did not build relationships with the houses I considered beneath my concern," she said. "I focused my attention on the significant bloodlines, the powerful ones, and I treated the smaller houses as background. Scenery." Her jaw tightened slightly. "Two of those smaller houses, which I had not bothered to know, became significant problems 40 years later. I had no relationship with them. No standing. No ability to address the situation through anything other than force." "You had to use force," Issei said. "Yes," she said. "Which was effective but expensive. And unnecessary if I had invested earlier." She looked at him. "You are already not making that mistake. 23 vampires at your gate, and you go to meet each of them yourself." "Of course," he said. "They came a long way. Most sovereigns," she said, "send representatives." "I'm not most sovereigns," he said. "I'm barely any sovereign. I'm a 17-year-old who got something enormous dropped on him by the Dragon of Dragons and is trying to figure out how to hold it responsibly." He paused. "The least I can do is be there when someone shows up." She was quiet. The sword, she said? That Valdemir brought. You didn't take it. I gave it back, Issei said. I told him it should stay with his family. It's part of their history, not mine. He will have interpreted that as a statement, she said. Good, Issei said. I meant it as one. I'm not building a collection of tribute. I'm building something else. I don't know exactly what yet, but it isn't that. She held the teacup for a moment, looking at it. What is it? She asked. What are you building? Issei thought about it honestly. Not the political answer, not the strategic answer, but the actual answer. Something that makes things better, he said. The old structure, the sanguine throne, whatever it was, it dissolved. It left a gap, and the gap caused problems for 500 years. Great Red told me there was supposed to be a sovereign because the order of things requires one. Not for the vampire's sake specifically, for the order of things. He paused. So I want to build something that actually serves that function. Something that keeps things coherent. Without being a throne that people have to bow to. A throne that isn't a throne, she said. Something like that. She looked at him for a long, quiet moment. That, she said, is either going to be the most significant political innovation in 5 centuries or an absolute disaster. Probably both, Issei said. At different points. The almost smile. Probably both, she agreed. She stayed for 3 hours. Afterward, walking back through the city toward the estate, Issei was quiet, and Drake was quiet, and the awareness hummed steadily with the presence of the 23 vampires at the estate, and the more distant resonances of bloodlines across the world. And he thought about what Alchina had said about flexibility, and about the smaller houses, and about what she'd spent the last 2 hours telling him that she hadn't told anyone, as far as he could determine, ever. She trusts you, Drake said. It's been 2 meetings, Issei said. Trust is not always a slow process, Drake said. Sometimes it is immediate, and then the question is whether the person is honest enough to follow where it leads. A pause. She is not someone who trusts easily. For her, 2 meetings is significant. I know, Issei said. Do you know why? He thought about it. About the specific quality of her attention. About the laugh she'd surprised herself into. About the question she'd answered that no one had ever asked her before. Because I asked the right questions, he said. Because you asked her questions, Drake said. Not questions about the political situation or the vampire structure or the history. Questions about her. Her experience. Her failures. What she has learned. A pause. You treated her knowledge as something worth having, not because of her position but because of her specifically. It is worth having, Issei said. Yes, Drake said. But you would be surprised how rarely that is recognized. He arrived back at the estate to find controlled chaos. The chaos had a specific flavor that he was coming to recognize. The arrival of someone unexpected. The gate was attended by more of Rias's staff than usual, and the awareness registered a new presence. Old, very old, and distinctive in a way he hadn't felt before. Not like Alchina, who felt self-contained, like a castle. This felt more like weather, diffuse and comprehensive and capable of covering everything. He went to the gate. The vampire standing there was not tall. This was the first thing he noticed, after the previous 2 weeks of significant supernatural beings, many of whom expressed their authority through sheer physical scale. This one was average height, slight, with the kind of face that had probably looked young when she was turned and had maintained that quality across centuries in a way that made the word young feel inadequate. She was, the awareness told him, very old. Possibly the oldest he'd felt in person. She looked at him with eyes that were the color of old amber, darker than Alchina's gold, more brown, and with an expression of such complete, settled composure that composure felt like the wrong word. It was more like bedrock. Something that had been still for so long that stillness was its nature. Sovereign, she said. Please don't kneel, Issei said. She looked at him. She hadn't been going to kneel, she was one of the ones who hadn't moved toward it, which told him something immediately. I wasn't, she said. Good, he said. I'm Issei. What's your name? Mara, she said. Of the root line. She said it simply, without the weight that most vampires put on their lineage introductions. As if it were information rather than credential. Root line, Issei said. The oldest, she said. The first. There are 7 of us remaining who carry the original blood without dilution. She paused. We have not submitted to any authority since the last sovereign fell. I'm not asking for submission, Issei said. She looked at him steadily. I know, she said. That is why I came. A pause. The Dimitrescu woman, she came to you. Yes, he said. She told the root line, Mara said, that you were worth seeing. She does not say that about things. Her old amber eyes studied him. She was correct. Issei looked at her. Alchina told the root line to come? She told us you were not what we expected, Mara said. Given what we expected, that was sufficient recommendation. He thought about the tea house. The 2.5 hours. The laugh she'd surprised herself into. The 3 hours the second time. Alchina Dimitrescu, who had not submitted to any authority in centuries, who had come to the meeting as an equal, who had given him the honest history of her own failures, had gone back to the oldest vampires alive and said, he's worth seeing. She didn't tell me she was going to do that, Issei said. No, Mara agreed. She wouldn't. A pause. She is not a person who announces her decisions before she makes them. That's a very accurate observation, Issei said. I have known her for 300 years, Mara said. I have had time to observe. She tilted her head slightly. She is also not a person who makes such recommendations carelessly. The last time she told anyone that someone was worth seeing, it was 1887. Issei absorbed that. What happened in 1887? A poet, Mara said. The recommendation was accurate then too. She paused. She has a precise sense for things that are genuinely new. He stood at the gate of the Gremery estate in the Tuesday afternoon light and thought about a woman with amber eyes who had come to a tea house and talked to him for 2.5 hours and then gone to the oldest vampires on earth and said something that had sent them here. Come inside, he said to Mara. Please. I'll have someone get you settled. I want to talk to you, but I need to make a phone call first. Mara looked at him, the old amber eyes doing their own kind of assessment. Then she nodded, once, and followed his staff inside. Issei stepped to the side of the gate and called Alchina. She answered on the third ring. Issei. Her voice, even through the phone, had that specific layered quality. The root line is at my gate, he said. A pause. Yes. You told them to come, he said. I told them, she said carefully, that the situation was worth their attention. I did not instruct them. Another pause. There is a difference. Why? He asked. Why tell them at all? You came to evaluate. You could have kept your conclusions to yourself. A silence that was longer than the pauses before it. Because, she said finally, with the specific quietness of someone saying something true that they haven't said before, the structure you are building is going to need the root line's recognition to be stable. And the root line does not give that recognition based on the sovereignty alone. They need, she paused, something more specific. Something personal. And you gave them the personal recommendation, he said. I gave them accurate information, she said. What they do with it is their decision. He stood at the gate and looked at the estate and thought about what it meant that Alchina Dimitrescu, centuries of absolute authority, coming to him as an equal, not submitting to anything, had gone to the oldest vampires alive and told them the sovereign was worth seeing. Alchina, he said. Yes, she said. Thank you. A pause. You keep thanking me, she said, with something in her voice that was not quite the sharpness she'd used to cover discomfort before. Something slightly more open than that. You keep doing things worth thanking, he said. Another pause. Longer. I will be in the city again on Wednesday, she said. If the situation with the root line allows it. It will, he said. Wednesday, she agreed, and ended the call. Issei stood at the gate for a moment in the afternoon light, with the awareness humming around him, and the 23+1 vampires in the estate behind him, and the distant presences of bloodlines across the world, and the weight of something enormous that he was learning, one conversation at a time, how to carry. She is investing, Drake said. I know, Issei said, in you. In what you are building. Not just the sovereignty, in you. I know, Issei said again. What are you going to do about it? He thought about amber eyes across a tea table. About the laugh that had surprised itself out of centuries of composure. About a recommendation given to the oldest beings on earth by someone who had told him her failures before she told anyone her name. Keep showing up, he said. Keep asking the right questions. That is, Drake said, your answer for everything. It keeps working, Issei said. He went back inside, to the root-line vampire with the ancient eyes and the bedrock composure, and sat down across from her, and said, tell me about the beginning. What was the first sovereign like? What did they get right? And Mara, who was very old and had not spoken about the beginning to anyone in a very long time, looked at him with those old amber eyes, and began to speak. The summons came on a Thursday. Not a message this time, not through the vampire communication network, or a phone call, or a formal letter on heavy cream paper. It came through the awareness itself, which was something Issei hadn't known was possible until it happened, a resonance, deliberate and structured, originating from 7 points simultaneously and converging on him with the specific quality of something that had been coordinated. He was in the middle of his math test when it arrived. The awareness didn't hurt, it wasn't painful, nothing like an alarm. It was more like someone placing a hand on your shoulder from behind, unmistakable, attention-demanding, impossible to ignore. He sat in the Co-Academy exam room with his pencil over question 7 and felt 7 very old things turn their attention toward him with the unified focus of beings who had spent centuries learning to act in concert when they chose to. He finished the test anyway. That was either impressive self-discipline or worrying compartmentalization, Drake observed, when he walked out of the exam room 40 minutes later. Math test, Issei said. The summons was going to be there whether I finished or not. Fair. He called Rias from the hallway. I felt something, she said, before he could speak. Through the estate's wards. Something significant was directed at you. The root line, he said. All 7 of them. Together. He paused. They want a meeting. A brief silence. When? Saturday, he said. Not because anyone had told him Saturday, but because the awareness had a shape to it, a when embedded in the how, and Saturday was what it said. That's 2 days, Rias said. Yes, Issei. She paused, and he could hear her working through the political implications at speed. A formal gathering of the root line has not occurred in Sona's records don't go back far enough to say definitively, but the estimate is several hundred years. At minimum. I know, he said, and they're calling it now. For you. For me, he agreed. A longer pause. Where? I don't know yet, he said. I'll find out. He thought about who he needed to call. I need to talk to Alchina. Another pause, this one with a different quality. The quality Rias had when she was noticing something and deciding how to respond to it. Of course, she said, with a carefulness that was itself information. Yes. Call her. Alchina answered immediately, which was something he noticed. She never let it ring more than twice, which for someone of her composure and authority was not indifference to the call but the opposite. I felt it, she said. You're connected to the root line summons? He asked. I felt it through you, she said, which was different and which landed with a particular weight. The sovereignty resonates. When the root line directed something significant at it, I felt the echo. A pause. You were in a mathematics examination. How did you know that? Because the resonance was steady and contained for 40 minutes before you responded, she said. You finished what you were doing before you addressed it. The test was already in progress, he said. A sound that was almost a laugh. Yes, she said. Of course it was. She was quiet for a moment. Saturday. The gathering is Saturday. I know, he said. Where? Neutral ground, she said. There is a location, a property in the Swiss Alps that has been used for significant vampire gatherings since the 15th century. The root line maintains it jointly. A pause. It is not a comfortable place. It is a working space. Old stone, old wards, minimal comfort. It is designed to be equal. No house's territory. Everyone on the same footing. That sounds right, Issei said. You will need to fly, she said. Or whatever the devil equivalent is. We have ways, he said. Will you be there? The pause this time was longer. The root line did not specifically invite me, she said. I'm inviting you, he said. Another pause. As what? He thought about it. Not strategically, not what the political framing should be, not what message it would send to the root line. Just honestly, what was she, in the context of this? What did he want her there as? As someone whose judgment I trust, he said. As someone who knows things I don't. As, he paused, a person I want in the room. A silence. That is, she said slowly, not a political answer? No, he agreed. The root line will interpret it as a statement, she said. My presence at your invitation, it will communicate something about where I stand. I know, he said. Only come if you're comfortable with what it communicates. The silence this time was different from the others. Not the silence of processing or consideration, but the silence of someone who has already decided and is taking a moment with the decision before speaking. I will be there, she said. Saturday arrived with the specific quality of important days, not dramatic, not cinematic, just present, with an attention to detail that ordinary days didn't have. The Swiss Alps property was accessible through a transit circle that Rias established in the estate's basement, coordinates provided by Mara through the root line's communication network. They arrived in a stone antechamber that smelled of old rock and cold air, and something that Issei's awareness identified as warding, layers of it, ancient and dense, the magical equivalent of load-bearing walls. Rias came. Aquino came. Kiba came, for security, with the particular quiet readiness he always carried. Kaneko came because Kaneko went where the peerage went, and had packed, with characteristic Kaneko pragmatism, sandwiches, because meetings ran long. Alchina was already there. She was standing in the antechamber when they arrived, in something that was the most formally structured thing Issei had seen her wear, dark green so deep it was nearly black, gold at the collar and cuffs, her hair arranged with precision, the rings on her fingers including ones he hadn't seen before, older ones, heavier. She looked at him when they came through, and the amber eyes did a quick assessment of the group, Rias, Aquino, Kiba, Kaneko, and then returned to him. You brought your people, she said. You brought yourself, he said. We're even. Something in her expression settled, a small relaxation of attention he hadn't noticed until it eased. The root line is assembled, she said. They are, in their way, eager. Which for them looks identical to their usual composure, but I have known most of them long enough to recognize the difference. Eager about what? Issei asked. About you, she said. Mara spoke to them after her visit to the estate. She said. Alchina paused. She said you asked about the beginning? About the first sovereign. I wanted to know, Issei said. No one, Alchina said, has asked about the beginning in 500 years. Most beings who inherit power are interested in their own position within the history. You asked about what came before you. She paused. Mara found that significant. It is significant, Issei said. I can't understand what I'm supposed to be doing now without understanding what the thing was for before. He watched Alchina's expression do its layering thing, the composure, and underneath it, something that was paying very close attention. Are you ready? She asked. He looked at his peerage, Rias's calm certainty, Aquino's watchful grace, Kiba's steady readiness, Kaneko eating a sandwich with the serene practicality of someone for whom all situations were navigable if you had adequate calories. Yeah, he said. Let's go. The main chamber was old. Not old like a well-maintained historical building. Old like bedrock, the kind of age that isn't preserved but simply is, continuous and uninterrupted from its beginning to now. The stone walls had been here since the building of them, and had not needed to be anything else. The ceiling was high and vaulted and undecorated except for the natural patterns in the stone. There was a table, round, which Issei noticed immediately and which he suspected was deliberate, and around it 7 chairs, plus additional seating arranged against the walls. The 7 of them were already seated, root-line vampires, the oldest living, 7 beings who had been alive since before most of human recorded history had happened, who had watched civilizations build and fall with the patient attention of something that expected to still be here afterward. They were not uniformly ancient in appearance. One of them looked older, several looked ageless in different ways. Mara looked young in the same unsettling continued way she had at the estate. They looked at Issei when he entered, all 7, simultaneously. The awareness rang like a struck bell, 7 points of very old blood, very old power, all oriented toward the sovereignty he carried. The feeling was enormous and not entirely comfortable, the way direct sunlight on closed eyelids is not entirely comfortable, not painful, but more than you can look at directly. He walked to the table without hesitating. This was important, he'd decided on the transit circle over. The hesitation, the moment of visible adjustment, the body language that said this is overwhelming, would communicate something he didn't want to communicate. Not because he was pretending not to be affected, but because being affected and being functional were not mutually exclusive, and he'd had enough experience with overwhelming things to know how to be both. He sat in the chair that was clearly his, the one oriented toward the other 7, positioned to face the table as a whole. Rias and the peerage took the wall seating. Alchina sat in a chair slightly separate from both groupings, not at the table, not against the wall. Her own position. The eldest of the 7, a man who looked genuinely old, which meant something for a vampire, the kind of age that showed as bone-deep certainty rather than surface weathering, spoke first. "Sovereign," he said. His name, Issei had learned from Mara's brief introduction in the antechamber, was Aldous. He had been the first of the 7 to be turned, which meant he was the closest to the original blood. "Aldous," Issei said. "Thank you for the invitation." A slight shift in the room, not dramatic, but present. He'd used the name immediately, without confirmation, and he'd called it an invitation rather than a summons. "You know my name," Aldous said. "Mara told me," Issei said. "She told me all your names. I wanted to know before I came." He paused. "Names matter." Aldous looked at him for a long moment. "The summons was an invitation," Issei said, not combatively. "Just clearly. I prefer to treat it as one. If I'm wrong about that, tell me." A silence. "You are not wrong," Aldous said slowly. "It was an invitation. We did not know if you would read it that way." "Why wouldn't I?" Issei asked. "Because summoning has power over it," said one of the other 7, a woman, angular and precise, who Issei identified as Vashti, second oldest. "A summons implies authority. Authority over the sovereign would be a significant thing." "The sovereignty is a relationship," Issei said. "Not a hierarchy. I'm not above you in a chain that means I can ignore what you say. He searched for the right framing, a point of convergence, something that holds things together. That requires actually being in the room with the things it's supposed to hold." 7 very old beings looked at him. "That," said the third, a tall vampire named Kale, "is not how any previous sovereign understood the position." "How did previous sovereigns understand it?" Issei asked. A pause. "As authority," Aldous said. "As the apex of a structure. The capacity to command, to decide, to override the houses when the sovereign judged it necessary." "Did it work?" Issei asked. The silence this time was specific. "The sovereignty lasted, at its height, approximately 2 centuries before the internal fractures became irrecoverable," Mara said, from her seat. She said it with the directness she'd shown at the estate. No softening, just accuracy. 2 centuries, Issei said. "And the position has been empty for 500 years. "Yes," Mara said. "So the Apex Authority model had a 2-century lifespan and a 500-year aftermath," Issei said. "I'd like to try something different." He said it simply, without drama. It was the most straightforward thing he'd said in the room, and it landed with the weight of the most significant. The 7 exchanged glances, not dramatic, not theatrical, the subtle communication of beings who had been in dialogue with each other for long enough that the full exchange happened in the visible margins of expression. Aldous spoke. What would different look like? Issei had thought about this. He'd thought about it in the math test and on the transit circle and in the conversations with Alchina and in the quiet of the estate's grounds at 3 in the morning when the awareness was loud and the questions were louder. "The sovereignty exists because the order of things requires a point of convergence," he said. Great Red said that. He said the gap felt the absence of it. "That means the position isn't about power over vampires. It's about something structural. Something that keeps the larger order coherent." He paused. "Which means the sovereign's job isn't to rule vampires. It's to be a point of stability. A reference. Something that the bloodlines can orient toward when they need coherence, and otherwise leave alone." "Leave alone," Vashti said, with the precision of someone identifying a specific and significant word. "I'm not going to tell you how to run your territories," Issei said. "I'm not going to adjudicate your internal politics unless something is genuinely threatening the larger order. I'm not going to build a court that you have to navigate to access your own sovereignty." He met her eyes. "You've been doing this for centuries without me. You know what you're doing. I'm not here to manage you." "Then what are you here for?" Kale asked. "To be available when it matters," Issei said. "To be a point that holds when things become unstable." To understand enough about what you are and what you need that when I do have to make a decision, it's actually informed. He paused. And to be honest about what I don't know. Which is a lot. The room was quiet. From her position against the wall, slightly separate from everything, Alchina was watching him with an expression that he couldn't fully read from this angle, but that had the quality of something paying close and genuine attention. You are, Aldous said, after a long moment, 17 years old. Yes, Issei said. You carry a Longinus-class sacred gear containing the Welsh dragon. Yes. You are a low-class devil by rank in the underworld structure. Third class, technically, Issei said. Though the ranking system and what I can actually do have had a complicated relationship since the beginning. And Great Red, Aldous said, yielded to you? He yielded the sovereignty, Issei said. I think that's different from yielding to me specifically. He was looking for the right container. I happened to show up at the right moment, being the right kind of thing. What kind of thing? Mara asked. Issei thought about it honestly. Someone who would take it seriously without taking himself too seriously, he said. Someone who has enough of the right instincts, but not enough of the wrong ones. He paused. I think Great Red had been watching for a while. He said as much. He'd been waiting for something that would hold it differently than it had been held before. Aldous was quiet. Then he said, with the weight of the oldest living being in the room, which was considerable, the last sovereign believed that authority was its own justification, that the position legitimized the decisions made from it. A pause. Every house learned, over 2 centuries, to work around that authority rather than with it. The fractures were not sudden, they were accumulated. Small decisions that felt absolute, made by someone who did not understand that the absolute feeling of a decision is not the same as its wisdom. And when it fell, Issei said the gap left was too large to fill with the existing structure. Yes, Aldous said. So the houses built their own structures, Issei said. Necessary ones. You've had 500 years of those structures. I'm not going to tear them down. What will you build instead? Kale asked. Issei looked around the table. 7 very old faces, 7 very old sets of eyes, all with the particular quality of beings whose experience was long enough that they'd stopped being surprised by most things and were now surprised by very specific ones. I don't know yet, he said. Honestly. I have ideas. I have things I want to avoid. But I'm not going to come in here and tell you I have a plan, because I don't. Not a complete one. He paused. What I have is a commitment to figuring it out with people who know more than I do. Which is everyone in this room. A silence. Then, from against the wall, Alchina's voice, quiet, direct. He means it. 7 heads turned toward her. She met their collective attention with the composure of someone entirely unmoved by being looked at by 7 of the oldest beings alive. I have spent 4 hours with him across 2 meetings, she said. He means what he says. He asks questions because he wants answers, not because he wants to appear to be listening. He acknowledges what he doesn't know without using the acknowledgement as performance. She paused. He is, she chose the word with care, genuine. The word landed in the room with more weight than its syllables suggested. Mara looked at Aldous. Aldous looked at Mara. Something passed between them that was the communication of 2 beings who had been in dialogue for longer than most nations had existed. We have a question, Aldous said, returning his attention to Issei. One question, which is the question we called this gathering to ask. Ask it, Issei said. What do you want? Aldous said. Not from the sovereignty. Not from us. For yourself. What does Issei Haida want, in the light that is larger than this room and this position? The question landed like a stone in still water. Issei hadn't expected it. He'd prepared for political questions, for challenges to the legitimacy of the sovereignty, for tests of knowledge about vampire history and structure. He had not prepared for the oldest vampire in the world to ask him what he wanted for himself. He took a moment. Not performing the consideration, actually considering. I want to get home to my family for dinner, he said. I want my peerage to be okay. I want the people I'm responsible for to have good lives. He paused. I want to figure out what kind of sovereign this position needs me to be and do that well. And I want, he stopped, considered, continued. I want to keep having the kinds of conversations I've been having this week. With people who know things I don't. With people who will tell me when I'm wrong. He paused. I want this to be worth the weight of it. The room was quiet for a long time. Then Aldous said, the root line gives its recognition, simply. Without ceremony. The words themselves were the ceremony. Issei looked at him. What does that mean, specifically? Practically? Aldous looked at him, and something in those ancient eyes, something that had been settled bedrock for centuries, shifted very slightly towards something warmer. It means, he said, that you are not alone in this. They ate afterward. This was not something Issei had planned or expected. Kaneko had packed sandwiches, which turned out to be unnecessary because the Swiss property had a kitchen that the Root Lion's caretaking staff had prepared with quiet thoroughness, and which produced food that was significantly better than sandwiches, though Kaneko ate both without visible preference. The formal arrangement dissolved into something less formal, which was a thing Issei had noticed happened when you stopped performing significance, and just let people be in a room together. Kale ended up in deep conversation with Kiba about European sword traditions, because Kiba was constitutionally incapable of being in the same room as someone with relevant historical knowledge and not asking about it. Mara sat with Akino and talked about something with a quiet intensity that Issei couldn't hear across the room but that had the quality of two people discovering a shared reference point. The others dispersed through the space in the organic way that groups do when the formal reason for gathering has been satisfied. Issei ended up at the edge of the room, near a window that looked out over the Alps in the clear winter afternoon, and Alchina materialized beside him with the quality of motion that meant she'd crossed the room deliberately, and had done so without making it look like she was crossing the room deliberately, which was an impressive skill. The recognition, he said. Yes, she said. You knew they were going to give it. I thought they would, she said. I was not certain. What would have made them not? He asked. She considered. If you had come in with the authority posture, she said. If you had let the sovereignty lead instead of yourself. She paused. They have spent 500 years watching positions mistake themselves for people. They were waiting to see whether you had made the same error. Authority posture, he said. Is that what you were worried about? Before you came to the tea house? She was quiet for a moment. I was worried, she said slowly, that the sovereignty would have shaped you toward it. That the power of the position would have begun to express itself through your behavior before you had the chance to express yourself through the position. She paused. It happens. Power that size, received suddenly, has its own gravity. It tried, Issei said. The first morning after, I could feel it, the way the awareness